Awesome. So since I am recording this for folks who weren't able to attend in person, I will just introduce myself. I'm Becky Bullard. I run Democrasexy, which is events and content that tries to make it more sexy to be involved in democracy and try to make it more fun and encouraging for folks to get involved in civic engagement and to figure out how to make progress on the issues that we care about. And I couldn't be more thrilled to have Kathryn Kolbert here with me. There's a lot to say about her, but so I'm just going to read like her very, very short bio. She has a long and distinguished career advancing women's rights. In 1992, she made her second appearance before the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing and winning Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which has been widely credited with saving Roe v. Wade. She's a co-founder of the Center for Reproductive Rights and the Athena Film Festival. She also created the NPR program Justice Talking and the Athena Center for Leadership at Barnard College. And I was very lucky to be able to meet Kitty, I think is what most people call you, right?
That's correct.
Is it okay if I call you Kitty?
Absolutely.
Okay. I was so honored to be able to meet you when you gave your TED Talk at the TED Women Conference. And for folks who follow me on social media, you've seen me post. I was like so riled up after that talk and in the room when you said that Roe was going away like this year. I have never heard that many people gasp at one time. That was intense. So I guess just to kind of like get us right into it for folks who maybe haven't finished reading the book yet or haven't had a chance to watch your TED Talk, can you tell us what your crystal ball tells you about the future of Roe v. Wade?
So let me start by thanking you for doing this, and thanks for all of you who have tuned in. And the news is very depressing. There's just no way around that. The Supreme Court is deciding a case called Dobbs versus Mississippi Health Services or something like that. I'm not exactly remember the exact name, but basically it's a ban on abortion at 15 weeks of pregnancy. And this particular court, as you all know, is extraordinarily conservative. They are vehemently anti-abortion. And in my crystal ball, there are at least 5, there may even be 6 votes to eliminate the federal constitutional protection that we have all held dear for the last, since 1973, so almost 50 years. What that means is that the question of abortion without federal constitutional protection will return to state legislators who will have the power to ban abortion or enact any other restrictions that they see appropriate, and that women will have to go to the relatively few states that will keep abortion legal. So let me just geographically, let me kind of lay the groundwork on all of this. First of all, as I said in the TED Talk, as I say repeatedly in the book, this isn't about what's right. This isn't about what is should be constitutionally protected. It's about power. And in the United States Supreme Court, there's only one number that matters, and that's 5. And if you have 5 votes for a particular point of view, you have the power to make the change. And however noble we think the court has been in previous years, however committed to the rule of stare decisis or to keep legitimacy in the law and to keep some consistency in the law, this particular court is not willing to do that. And they're much more likely than any court in my lifetime to implement a political agenda that mirrors those who put them in office. And I find that incredibly, as a lawyer, incredibly depressing. But what that means is, let me just give you the clarity here. What that means is about somewhere between 21 and 26 states will ban abortion, have already banned abortion or are likely to do so. About 20 of them have already done so. And those laws will take effect when the court opens the door to their implementation. That also means that geographically, you're going to see a wide swath of the South, somewhere from Georgia all the way to west of Texas, and a good part of the mountain states from Idaho all the way south to the Mexican border, banning abortion. Now, the bans will be, a little bit different from state to state, but they are all going to have the same effect, which is that abortion will be functionally unavailable in all of those states. Uh, and women will either have to travel to a safe state, the 21 states that are likely to permit abortion and safeguard the rights we know, or find a way to get medication abortion through a gray or black market. And a good number of those women, about 53%, I'm sorry, 58% of women of childbearing age in the country will be affected and will be unable to obtain services within their home states.
I mean, it's pretty much happened here in Texas already with our 6-week ban. Is essentially almost nobody can get an abortion here now. And the Supreme Court
Becky,
is like, fine.
Yeah, the court, yes, the court has said, oh, fine. They really don't care. And that's the best clue we have about what they're likely to do in the Mississippi case, because they basically said, let this law go into effect. We don't really care what happens to women. Interestingly enough, because Texas was the only state that banned abortion, a great number of the women who were facing unintended pregnancies and wanted procedures were able to get them. Now, obviously not all, but about 90% have either been able to get to a provider before the 5th week of pregnancy, or find providers in nearby states, or have access to self-managed care through medication abortion. That's much more optimistic than I had suspected, but I don't think that's what will happen once all 21 states ban.
Right.
Options of women to go to Oklahoma, for example, or to Kansas or nearby won't be there. So I think that it's in some ways a big red herring, and we're likely to see a much smaller number of abortions performed in illegal states going forward.
That makes sense for sure. So, I mean, this book and hearing you talk, there's a tremendous sense of urgency. Like the word now is underlined a couple times. And I'm curious, what has the reception been from readers, or the reception of this book? Like, are people responding with that same level of urgency?
I don't think so. I wish to God I would say that they were. But let me say 2 things about that. The reaction you had at the TED Talk, the reaction in the room. This was a room of about 800 women who from all over the country, who I would say probably 80% or 90% identify as feminists or activists or interested in women's rights and women's accountability, women's autonomy, and women's equality. They wouldn't be there unless that was the case. And they didn't believe that the court was ready to overrule Roe. So I think there is a good, my general belief is, unless you're kind of steeped in this issue, or unless you are a lawyer who kind of follows the Supreme Court, you don't believe that this is going to happen. So I do think there's going to be a bit of a shock, even though newspapers have said repeatedly, and all of us have been crying wolf for a long time. I think there's going to be a bit of a shock. Now, that doesn't mean people will take action right away. It may only mean that they're surprised.
Right.
And I am hopeful that enough of the activists will have things for people to do right away to at least turn that alarm into political power. And that's the only thing that we can do now, that is win back new political powers in order to change what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it makes me even more glad that we're talking about this now. So hopefully, at least those of us who are on this call or watching this afterwards will have some idea of the things that we can start doing now, so that when our friends come to us and say, what do? We could say, oh, well, I've got a list here of things. So thank you for getting that list started for us. And what we're going to do later on after the Q&A is we're going to have kind of a little brainstorming session with the folks who are on the call. We'll go through kind of the 10 next steps as you've outlined them in your book, and kind of pick maybe one or two that we want to focus on first that seem like we can kind of really get our arms around. So that will come a little bit later in the conversation. So because this has been sort of your life's work and you've been fighting for reproductive rights for decades, I'm curious what feels different to you now than like in the 90s when you argued and won Planned Parenthood versus Casey?
Well, Becky, I think that in many respects, it's a lot the same. That is, when I argued Casey, as I really lay out in the book, we believed at that time that Roe was going to be overturned. We thought once Clarence Thomas was confirmed to the Supreme Court that there were 5 votes at that time to overrule Roe. And in fact, we were right. That is, after my oral argument, the justices went back to their conference room and they took a preliminary vote on the case. And what they voted on was that there were 5 votes to overrule Roe, to change this, to permit the Pennsylvania law to take effect. And Justice Rehnquist, then the Chief Justice, wrote an opinion that overruled Roe. Now, he never said the magic words in that opinion, but what he did functionally was he said that any state that passes any law, so long as it is rational, will be allowed to have those laws go into effect. The standard of rationality is a lawyer's trick. It means something different than in the colloquial use of the term. But basically, in law, if a state is permitted to enact a rational statute, just about any statute will be upheld. Because in their view, protection of fetal life or protection even of women's health, even if the law doesn't do that, if the legislature claims that it does, that would make rational and would permit the law to take effect. So Chief Justice Rehnquist wrote that opinion, and it wasn't until almost before it was issued that Justice Kennedy, Anthony Kennedy, changed his mind and sided with a coalition of judges, Sandra Day O'Connor and Justice Souter. And the 3 of them wrote what became the joint opinion in Casey, which upheld what we would call the hallmarks of Roe. It said that states can't ban abortion before fetal viability, but it allowed states to enact some restrictions. And those restrictions were fine as long as they didn't impose what the court called an undue burden on women. And in the intervening 20 years, what constitutes an undue burden has really changed. More and more restrictions have been upheld as the courts got more conservative, the states got more adamant, and more of those restrictions have been upheld, to the point that today abortion's unavailable in about 90% of counties in this country. And the most disempowered women who have less access to health care, primarily women of color, poor women, young women, disabled women, rural women, all of them have a very difficult time obtaining care.
And that kind of leads me to my next, I learned so much from the book, but one of the things that really stood out to me is, obviously there's a lot of holes in Roe. As you're saying, so many people functionally don't have access to abortion. And also a lot of things I hadn't realized, such as that the Supreme Court was really more interested in protecting the interests of doctors than the freedom of women. And so with these things in mind and the shortcomings of Roe, can you share some of the silver linings of having to find another way?
Well, let me just say that I think in some ways Roe gets a bum rap because under today's standards, providing a right to doctors, actually to women in consultation with their doctors, seems a little archaic, right? That women ought to have those rights on their own. But in 1973, that was actually quite a radical
Hmm.
frame, extending a right to privacy to protect the ability to terminate a pregnancy just hadn't been on the wavelength of many of the policymakers of our country. And Justice Blackmun got 7 votes for that point of view. So I feel like, yes, we wouldn't frame it that way today. But at the same time, 75% of Americans believe that the decision about abortion should be made by a woman in consultation with her doctor. That's the highest poll number we have. And therefore, it seems to me Blackmun was in some ways very prescient about what would be appropriate and acceptable to most Americans and frame the case in that way.
Makes sense. Um, and I mean, one of the other things that I really liked about the book is that it gave me more hopefulness about an opportunity that we have to go beyond just the right of abortion. And I mean, you don't put abortion in the title of the book, right? It's reproductive freedom. So maybe you could talk more about expanding our ideas of what is possible.
So even in Roe and more so in Casey, the court really talked about the ability of women and other pregnant persons to make decisions about important things in their life. And the ability to decide when, where, and with whom to have children really is central to not only women's equality, but her ability to participate in the kind of the functioning of society as a whole. And without those rights, women's participation is really circumscribed. And, you know, as we know, if you have to have children when you become pregnant, that limits what you can do. It may mean some women can't go to school. It may mean they can't get health care. It may mean that they can't afford to feed their families. There's all kinds of ramifications of having children when you are not ready to do so. Or when you already have children and you have a family to support, and you don't want a larger family. All of
Which most women who seek abortions have children already, right?
Yeah, about 59%. So yes, a huge number already have children. They understand. That's the irony of this is legislators have this very weird view that women are just making these decisions willy-nilly. They have no understanding of what's going on. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. They know exactly what's going on, and they know exactly what's best for their families and their lives and their relationships. And men, too, are participating in those decisions about what's best for their lives. But that question about, reproductive autonomy, the ability to make important decisions, the ability to protect your health and your physical well-being are all wrapped up in this question. But what's not wrapped up in this question is the fact that this is a religious decision that ought to be imposed on everyone. I mean, those who oppose abortion say, well, this is a religious thing. That's my right, it's my religion. It has to be respected. And my position is, yeah, great. It's your religion. If you don't want to have an abortion, don't have one. But don't impose your religious belief, which is not universal. In fact, it's not universal at all. Don't impose that on the rest of us. Let each family, each woman, each pregnant person make these decisions on their own.
There's something that gives me hope about all of this. I was raised evangelical Baptist. I had very strong, I wrote when I was a freshman in high school, a very passionate essay about how abortion was like the worst possible thing because that is what I had been indoctrinated with. But the fact that I was able to unlearn all that gives me hope that other people can as well. And that, I think there's a growing movement in sort of evangelical circles of people who are changing their mind on lots of topics like LGBTQIA rights and abortion. So my fingers are crossed for those folks.
Well, I think one of the interesting parts about the abortion issue, and providers will tell you this all the time, is a lot of the people who are out protesting, outside their clinics, when they themselves are facing an unintended pregnancy, their perspective really changes. Then they're coming in the back door so their friends can't see and getting abortions because that's what's appropriate for their life. And I always say, the only exceptions that work are life, rape, incest, and me.
Yeah.
Because the reality is the me is what's important. And I think the great social debate always comes down to, well, what exceptions should be permitted? And my position is the world is just too diverse. The world is just there's too much nuance in personal relationships to have anything prescribed. That is the beauty of our Constitution, at least what should be the beauty of our Constitution, is that it respects individual decision making based on the circumstances of their life, not what a legislator or a bully or a pastor or a teacher or anybody else believes should be appropriate for them.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. And yeah, it was like the more that I learned, the more that I realized that I couldn't possibly understand every circumstance. So I was like, oh yeah, no, it should just be allowed. I saw Gloria Steinem, an interview with her recently, where she said that if the Supreme Court overturns Roe, then we just won't comply. What's your take on that?
Yes, that's true. In fact, that's what happened in the days before Roe. I highly recommend a new film that's going to be released sometime this summer, probably around June or July, called The Janes, which is the story of the Jane Collective in Chicago of women who did abortions. And I think what the movie shows, and what we know from Texas, and what we know from the circumstances in the days before Roe, is that bans on abortion don't stop abortion. Okay, bans on abortion only mean that the people with the fewest resources suffer the most. The people who have resources are able to travel. I mean, in the days before Roe, women from all over the country flew, drove, took buses, took trains to New York City and Washington State and California to have abortions. I grew up in the Midwest, so I lived in Detroit and could see the billboards, as I was in high school, with the big, safe abortion on demand in Canada. And women from Michigan went to Canada to have procedures. Or, all kinds of women, if you talk to your grandparents, they will tell you about the stories of women traveling to safe states. So yes, women will do that. But now, a little bit differently than in the days before Roe, there is the availability of a safe way to have an abortion through medication in the first 11 to 12 weeks of pregnancy. And that means that the availability of a pill means that a lot of women will get that resource through a gray or black market. Women are already doing so in Texas. They're calling to a provider in Europe who has the drug sent to them from India, or they're calling providers in other states, and the drug is being sent to post office boxes in a legal state, and then forwarded to their home. There's all kinds of ways that they're driving across the border, picking up the drug and taking it and coming home. All kinds of ways that that's happening and will continue to happen. I'm never going to be one to advocate breaking the law, but the reality is women will do that, and they'll do that because facing an unintended pregnancy is unbearable in their particular life circumstances, and therefore they will do what it takes to seek safe medical care.
Do you think that we should be concerned about access to contraception? Do you think that that's kind of next on the list of things to take away from us?
I never used to think so, but I have to say that the right and the right wing has gotten so radical. And now they're even saying it out loud. Well, I always thought, abortion was part of what they opposed. The kinds of things we're seeing in state legislatures this year, uh, bans on talking about being gay in schools, library books being shredded, uh, anti-trans transphobia legislation that doesn't permit trans people to use bathrooms or to participate in sports or do anything else that that is appropriate for their lives. That kind of punitive, negative uh, efforts by state legislators is more radical than I had ever thought. And just this week, for example, we've seen state legislators talk about being actually a member of Congress, talking out loud at the hearings for Justice or soon to be Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, saying that he did not believe in interracial marriage.
Yeah.
The contraception. So the interesting part is a lot of the rights that we're talking about: contraception, interracial marriage, abortion, rights to make decisions about your kids in school. All of those flow from the legal concepts of substantive due process. They're part of the liberty protected by the 14th Amendment. And so when you take away a part of that one so central like that found in Roe, you undermine all the rest of those rights. And the right is going to continue to, it won't stop with abortion. They'll continue to do whatever they have the power to do.
I feel like
Which brings me back to, what do we have to do? And one of the
yeah.
things we got to do is we've got to flip state legislatures so they no longer have the power to enact such ridiculous kinds of legislation.
I do feel hopeful actually in Texas because it was a couple sessions ago when the trans bathroom bill was the big thing. And then the right lost a bunch of seats that next election. And the focus of the next session was education, which was great. And then this past session, they went back even further and pushed through a bunch of terrible stuff. So I'm hopeful that then people will respond by showing up to the polls unhappy about instead of fixing our electric grid, they've banned trans kids from sports. Like, okay.
Right, but I think the important part here is remember that in addition to enacting really bad things in Texas and all these other states, is that they've limited the ability of people to vote. And that means it's going to be harder and harder to take back the legislatures, to flip them, to make sure that we have governors who are supportive of constitutional rights and liberties. So it makes our job a lot harder. And Texas is a good example about how that's the case. You look at voting rights, who's been thrown off the polls, who's not able to vote in the big urban centers. All of that makes life harder, but not impossible. And I do think being able to activate angry people is our only solution.
I agree. I'm trying to activate all the people. So where are you finding hope these days?
Well, partly I'm finding hope by talking to groups like yours and groups all over the country who are concerned about this. I will find more hope when we can flip a few of the purple states and begin to enact protections for reproductive choice. I will find even more hope when we're able to preserve both the House and the Senate in Democratic hands going forward, because if we give the Senate back to the Republicans, trust me, no other judges are going to be appointed and confirmed that Biden selects. So we have no opportunity to turn back the lower federal courts. And frankly, none of good policies, the CARE agenda, the agenda that's been implemented by the House, will go into effect. So I do think there's a big possibility of losing both the House and the Senate, but good organizing on the ground can make a difference. And let me just say, most state House races, okay, are decided by very, very thin margins. It could be, I did a little look at Pennsylvania, which is my home state, and there were over 20 House seats that were decided by less than 1,500 votes.
Wow.
Okay, so that in closely divided purple states, a lot of elbow grease can go a long way. And you don't have to be in that purple state to work in those elections, right? You can give money, you can canvass, you can, well, if you don't even want to go there, you can get on the phone, you can do texting. And, if I don't know, are most of the people on this call from Texas? If you are,
Yeah.
flipping let's just say what's going to send the best message nationally? Getting rid of your governor.
Oh, yeah.
The governor of Texas and the governor of Florida are the two most despised governors in the country, at least people who are committed to undermining the rights of all of us and sending a message that they got to find another job quickly is the best message we can send across the country. It will reverberate across the nation. So, if you do nothing more than that, that is a really, really important job.
It's kind of exciting to be at ground zero here in a way, I guess. This has been so great. I appreciate you so much for joining us and for writing this book and for kind of giving us all a wake up call. But not just that, my favorite thing is when somebody gives me next steps to do. So I so appreciate you. And you are welcome to stick around for our little brainstorming session, or you can hop off, totally up to you.
Well, I actually unfortunately have to do another call, but I am thrilled that you guys are talking about it. Let me just add one more thing about that, which is there is no right answer about what to do. Okay. The only right answer is to do something. Okay. And to pick something that you can do consistently, because it's not enough to, make phone calls one day. Right? You got to pick something that you feel good about, that gives you community, that makes it fun to work, and which you can do for the next 20 years. Because this fight isn't going away. This is going to be going on for a long time. And we can't just try this legislative session, and if it doesn't work, give up. Think about the women in Georgia. It took 10, 15 years to register enough voters to be able to win those Senate races by this much. Okay, so, to actually flip the legislature to get people elected as governor and preserve the Democratic Senate seats, that's hard work. So thank you.
Yes. Well, yes, I'm very committed to making it fun and building community. So that's what we're all about here.
All right.
Thank you so much, Kitty. You're amazing. You're a national treasure.
Have fun.
Okay, I'll let you go. And then for the rest of us who are left, I have I'm going to share my screen. Thank you for being here, by the way. I know it's hard to do anything at any time ever. I feel like, so honestly, like the fact that y'all showed up means a lot to me. I've got a little, I'm going to share this maybe. So I kind of have summarized the next steps that they put in the book. And I'm going to go ahead and share. I have a little like poll that we can do. So I figured we could kind of like rank them by the ones that like we feel most passionate about working on. And maybe that will give us kind of like, because there's no way that we're going to be able to spend time talking about all of them. But I figured maybe then we can pick like one or two to kind of start brainstorming on the ones that are most popular. So the 10 that they list out, sort of 10 next steps to push for reproductive freedom, healthcare for all. Obviously, abortion is just a form of healthcare, and we all know that in this country, access to healthcare is pretty abysmal. So that's one. Just general healthcare is one place to start. And then, of course, reducing maternal and infant deaths and complications. Obviously, this is a big issue, and we know in Texas that especially, and across the country, but especially in Texas, Black women suffer the worst outcomes there. So there's some great organizations here that are working on that. So that's a great one. And then this is one where I combine two different ways of being pregnant by choice. One, more easy access to contraception. And then secondly, fighting infertility. That's something I dealt with when I was trying to get pregnant the first time. And it as with so much of healthcare, you only have access if you are, have the means. So that's another important one. And then I love sex ed is one of my favorite topics. So, and of course, yet again, that's another one, especially here in Texas, they are continually trying to keep kids from learning about. So that's also an important one. Affordable childcare in pre-K. If we are supporting parents, it makes it easier to be a parent. And then this is another one where I combined a couple of family-friendly workplace benefits and then fairness for pregnant workers. And then, of course, generally reducing sexual abuse, violence, and harassment. And then the last one was this global treaty protecting women's rights. And I actually looked up in Austin if anybody had done anything on that here. And there was in 2017, they passed like a resolution to support this. And I think the things that they decided to look at were like pay in government jobs in Austin, like gender disparity in pay, and then also names of streets, like how many were named after men and how many were named after women. I was like, that's an interesting place to start, but okay. So awesome. It looks like reducing sexual abuse, violence, and harassment is our kind of front runner here. So if that's something that y'all want to kind of like brainstorm on, we can do that. And then maybe we'll be able to get to one or two of the others too. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can just chit chat. I'm going to open up the book to that section and just see generally if they had some places to start. But have there been any advancements in that area that have been encouraging to y'all in the last few years? Or organizations that you really like that are working on those issues? I mean, obviously, Me Too is like a huge turning point. Although I was groped at a South by Southwest party and I was like, seriously? In the year 2022? Okay. One of the things that I think about too, when it comes to really any issue, I think about like, what are the things that I can do in my personal life and like in my home, basically, to like move the needle on any of this stuff. And one thing that I have found myself doing a lot, and it kind of just, I became more self-reflective, I think, during the pandemic when I was home and I wasn't busy, distracted by other things. I had a lot of time for self-reflection. And one of the things that I realized is that in my own home, in my own relationship, I often wouldn't speak up for myself. And my husband has never like done anything, bad to me, but just in terms of like speaking over me or like, I've caught myself when I have like allowed myself to be sort of like run over in those ways. And I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do that anymore. And I'm not going to model for my children. Like I can remember a time, I have two little girls, they're 5 and they're 8. And I remember my husband gets on them about cleaning up their room. And I remember saying to them one day, like, oh, we can't leave a mess. It'll make daddy mad. And then I was like, what a messed up like thing to put in. I'm like putting patriarchy in their heads. Like making daddy mad isn't the reason we should clean up our rooms. It's because like it's to be like, functioning humans. So I've been thinking a lot about like, what are the ways, and, of course, like, I'm not going to fix everything out there, but like, we have to start in here. I think, I think a lot of times we have this idea that big social change happens in big ways, but I think a lot of times it happens in really small ways. And so like, self-reflection, but also like, sharing these kinds of things with our friends. I know I find myself a lot of times in conversations with friends and like, it's very surface level. So I'm now starting to look for more ways to like talk about deeper things when it's appropriate, because it's like we start with our own little selves and then kind of like ripple out that way. And I think that that's actually how a lot of change can happen. I'm going to, just because I'm such a nerd about, one of the other things that I've done in the pandemic is become a witch and start doing tarot and all that kind of stuff. So I pulled before, when I was getting ready to do this session, I was like, oh, I'm gonna pull a tarot card for us to ask for like, how do we find encouragement on reproductive freedom, women's rights, like all this stuff. So I pulled a card, and it's the Queen of Coins. And so I'm going to read you what the book says. Sorry to take a total left turn and get like so woo woo all of a sudden, but like I thought it was really a sweet and beautiful and cool message. So it says, the Queen of Coins is a practical and even-handed provider, adept at maintaining and distributing her resources in efficient ways. Like her, you are an effective leader who is sought for your fair-minded counsel, and you often take on daring responsibilities. You are more than capable of caring for an entire network of people. The Queen of Coins also points to someone who has struck a positive work-life balance. I thought this was so like a really cool message for anybody who showed up to this, because I feel like this is true. And also the Queen of Coins is like it's the working mother card, which I was like, that's wild, because I know a lot of us are. And one of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading the book is they talk a lot about the importance of building coalitions. And there's a saying that is, you cross a river at the point where the banks are the closest, right? So like, as we're trying to build a coalition on reproductive freedom, women's rights, any of it, I think we need to be looking for the points where we and the folks on the other side are the closest. And I think one of the most egregious things that we saw in the pandemic is working mothers were some of the most affected people. Like, more women left the workforce, mostly mothers, than anybody else. And still, like, it's going to take decades to recover from that. And that is regardless of political ideology, right? So in thinking about how can we build coalitions with folks who maybe don't agree with us on everything, I was like, maybe that's where we start, is, working mothers, like those who've been affected by the pandemic in this way, how can we come together? Maybe not on every issue right away, but like, where can we find commonality there? So that was, and also just the idea of like, that we have the resources, right? Like, those of us who have the time and have the resources, like, it's kind of incumbent on us to show up for those who don't, because as those who are going to be most affected when Roe goes away, are most affected by, bad policy generally. They are in kind of just the struggle all the time to just live, and they don't have the time to show up to the Capitol to do all those things. So I don't know, I just thought it was a good encouragement, a good maybe like little direction for how to move forward. Let's see here. I was trying to remember if there were some other. Oh, the other thing that I was thinking about, um, after I pulled that card, I put this dress on, not even thinking about it at the time, but it's from LuLaRoe. Do y'all know?
Yeah. Mhm.
We watched the documentary.
I've seen like the first half of it. Yeah.
So that it's wild, right? But I got really into LuLaRoe when I had an infant at home. And I was thinking about, one of the things that made it so attractive to all these women is that it really provided kind of a community for women who had babies at home, who felt isolated, who also wanted to feel like they were doing something important and doing something like contributing, in a financial way to their families. And so I was like, oh man, what lessons can we learn from LuLaRoe about like how to build community, how to make women feel supported and empowered and important, but not have it be an MLM scheme. So I don't know if there's something around that, but that felt like, I don't know, anytime, we can build community, I feel like that's a good step in the right direction.
I was just thinking back to kind of what we were talking about with the reducing sexual abuse, violence, and harassment. And my mind always goes to SAFE, the organization in Austin that supports victims of domestic violence, and baby steps. But one of the things that they talk about on their website that they could use help with is building safety kits for the kids and the adults and the families who are staying there. So they have a list on their website of different things to help them reacclimate and create, new memories. And you can sign up for different kits and either donate money or donate actual items, or you can actually help make these boxes. So that's kind of cool. And then they also have another program where you can drop in and it looks like help make meals or package meals for the folks who are staying there as well.
That's cool.
So might be something volunteer wise that could be cool.
Yeah. Maybe we can make a little event to do that.
Yeah.
A couple months. That's cool. I love that. I'm trying to think. I feel like I had a bunch of other ideas as I was reading their suggestions. Well, y'all know I always like to throw parties, so I feel like stay tuned.
I'm looking forward to Valentine's Day.
Yes. Oh yeah. So if the rest of you have not heard about this yet, I'm putting together an event in support of the trans and gender diverse community. So I'm working on getting a venue and sponsors, and I don't have a date yet, but I'm getting close. But it's going to be before the May 24th runoff, because there's a runoff both for Ken Paxton on his side. He's in a runoff, as well as on our side too. And I feel like if people just had a better understanding of how messed up our Attorney General's office has been, and what a really good Attorney General could do in such a low turnout election, my hope is that we have a real chance on that one. So anyway, that's why I'm trying to get it done before that election. Just make sure that y'all are, as we get closer to that May 24th election, that y'all are talking to people about it and helping them understand how important it is. And of course, I'll put out a voter guide too. But yes, y'all will get information about Valentine's when I have more information, but it's going to be really fun. We're going to have, of course, a panel discussion to help the rest of us, because I feel very uninformed, and therefore afraid to say the wrong thing when it comes to issues of gender diversity. And I think a lot of folks who are cisgender, this is new for a lot of us. And so I think that keeps a lot of people from speaking up, because we don't want to get it wrong. We don't want to say the wrong thing. So I'm hoping to get us better informed so that we can show up more. But it'll also be really fun, like glitter beards and wigs and drag and all the fun things. So yes, stay tuned for that. Any other things we should talk about in our last couple minutes here? I'm going to do this. I'm going to send out an email when I send out the link to folks who weren't able to make it. I'll just send an email to everybody with maybe a couple ideas on next steps that we can take together, or just like a time when we can connect, maybe even in person for those of us that are in Austin. And yeah, just kind of like stay connected, keep this kind of issue top of mind, keep thinking about, what we can do, small and big and in between. And yeah, I appreciate y'all so much for being here.
Thank you for hosting this.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll let you go and you'll get an email from me in the not too distant future.
Thank you, Becky.